Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. I should say welcome back, Kieran, because here we are, live, so to speak, back again after your jaunt around the world when you were, your laptop was forcibly taken off you.
It was indeed, yes. I had a wonderful time, Washington, New York, Philadelphia, and met some good people, met some Palace fans as well, and they were all very welcoming. And went to the Palace pub in Philly. So that was it was all good.
Yeah, I'd have to say, Kieran, as I tweeted when I showed that photograph of you and the Palace fans out there shaking hands and holding each other's shirts, they haven't quite got the hang of the Palace Brighton thing, have they? Speaking of which, I'm glad you had a nice time. It was mainly Croydon and Thornton Heath for me, but. I missed you. I thought of you. I thought of you in particular when I was casually flicking through Sky Plus to see if there was anything on in between cricket, and I came across the Big Match Revisited, the last ever Big Match of 1979, December the 30th, 1979, and I thought, this is brilliant. And there was a Palace game on, and the very first thing Brian Moore said was, well, we'll be looking back at the 70s and we'll be looking forward to the 80s, and then we've got a profile of, I think, the most exciting young player that this country has seen. And I think, this is going to be great. It'll be Vince Hilaire, Jerry Murphy. No, it's Peter Ward. Peter Ward of Brighton, which was doubly annoying because the Big Match is London's football programme, but for some reason and it also had the most desultory Christmas tree I've ever seen on any TV show ever. Clearly they'd been to Woolworths, and there was 4 baubles on it, all of which were reflecting Brian Moore's bauble-shaped head.
It's like the London Planetarium, of course.
Absolutely, it's half man, half biscuit. It was half man, half biscuit, isn't it?
It was, absolutely.
It was, yeah. Right, now things have been happening, Kieran, while we were away.
They have.
Although clearly we haven't learnt not to distract ourselves before the pod, which many people might have been thinking, well, they've got 2 weeks off, they might get a bit more professional. No, we had other things to do. So things have been happening, Kieran, and before questions, as it's our questions pod, let's have a look at some of the bigger news stories. Finally, all those non-Chelsea fans who have spent the last 12 months going, how are they getting away with it? How's Chelsea getting away with it over FFP? And they're not totally getting away with it, Kieran, are they?
They're not. Yes, so for fans of the Chelsea, as they were referring to themselves when I saw them play Brighton in Philadelphia, and that was difficult to come to terms with.
What was the score? What was the score, by the way, in that?
It was 4-3 to Chelsea.
Oh, right. Was this part of that Premier League in America tournament?
The Summer Series, yes.
The Summer Series, yeah, where you could entertain yourself 5 minutes before the kick-off by watching the stewards forcing the fans that are in the ground as close to the front as possible.
There was 65,000 there somehow.
Were there?
It was big crowd.
Was that including season ticket holders? Because it didn't look a lot like 65,000 people.
No, it holds a huge number.
Okay.
It was a good experience. Apart from, we have a moan about the cost of catering over here. $27 for burger and fries.
Wow.
That's just ridiculous.
And that's without quinoa.
Exactly. Yeah, quinoa ketchup.
Yeah. There certainly weren't 65,000 people at the Brentford-Brighton game, were there?
I suspect not. Not in Atlanta. I mean, I don't think they've heard of Brentford or Brighton in Atlanta.
Anyway, Kieran, we're 4 minutes, 10 seconds in, and we still haven't properly started. And we have got... we need to get a wiggle on, Kieran, because we want to see the surly Australians do a guard of honour for Stuart Broad this morning.
We do. Yes. So the new owners of Chelsea have reported themselves to UEFA for breaches of FFP during the Abramovich era. And in particular, this relates to payments to agents which haven't been recorded appropriately. And UEFA have responded with a €10 million fine. And we don't know the exact details. But given the nature of football fans and given all of the hissy fits that we've seen in relation to Manchester City and fans saying, well, all of their trophies should now be starred with an asterisk, should the same happen to Chelsea? Because Chelsea won the Champions League under Abramovich in 2021. And remember, Manchester United have had similar in relation to a financial fair play breach. So it's not just one club to which this is happening. It does appear that the new ownership are doing a classic activity of anybody that takes over any business. They immediately manage to find some gremlins, which mysteriously they failed to find all during the period when they were doing due diligence.
Right. Okay.
Well, this is strange. And of course, it's a case of blaming the previous owners for any poor performance under the new regime. So under the Abramovich era, with Marina Graviskaya, who was paid the thick end, I think, of £40 million as both her final year salary and as a payoff. And also Bruce Buck, who should perhaps be known as Bruce Pass the Buck, given the way that his ability to disappear whenever the awkward questions started. So they're taking the moral high ground, is Todd Boehly and co. This is a full and final settlement. They say we just wanted to move on. We don't necessarily agree with everything that UEFA has said, but for the sake of let's focus on this year's football. And of course, it has to be a fine for this season because Chelsea aren't in any of UEFA's competitions following 12 months of the Todd Boehly management scheme.
You've answered the first question I had for you, Kieran, which is this idea of reporting themselves. Is that common practice? But is there a chance that they may have done a more forensic look at the books than they would have done before they were doing due diligence? I mean, if you talked about agents' fees, is that maybe something that they wouldn't have necessarily looked at? And secondly, will they be getting a lesser fine because they grassed themselves up, basically? Is them thinking, right, the UEFA would have found out eventually and it might have been a much bigger fine? Or do they have enough money that they're not really bothered what the fine is anyway?
Looking at those questions in turn, they probably wouldn't have looked at individual transfers and payments to agents. Although it's very strange that the old regime didn't report them, unless this was done specifically to try to circumvent financial fair play, because Roman Abramovich, and nobody knows that much about Roman Abramovich. And I think there are positives and some very big negatives with regards to him. Ultimately, he treated the club as a personal executive toy, and it cost him $900,000 a week for 19 years. So under those circumstances, why not disclose everything? So that doesn't, I think, reflect particularly well on the old regime. And again, he might have been completely unaware of it, because he did delegate responsibility on a day-to-day basis to Graviskaya and Buck. So there's that. In terms of reporting yourself, it does happen on occasion. I'm aware that Birmingham City, for example, they reported themselves to the EFL a couple of seasons ago. And this formed part of the basis for their points deduction. And under the EFL rules, you have aggravating and mitigating factors which impact upon the extent of the tariff that is given by the Commission. And in the case of Birmingham City, I think they ended up with 1 or 2 point reduction in the penalty. I think they ended up with a 9-point deduction because they reported themselves. So there is a case for handing yourselves in, and sometimes it is best to do that, especially if you're aware that perhaps the net is closing. Then just front up, and it saves time, it saves costs, and it gets clarity. And from Chelsea's point of view, a €10 million fine isn't here or there. Although perhaps if they found another 10 million that easily, they could find another 10 million and actually pay the asking price for Moises Caicedo, and then stop all the nonsense which is currently taking place in terms of social media and the free Caicedo hashtag, which is appearing mysteriously from Chelsea fans.
Yeah, if you want social media nonsense, just try putting hashtag Texter next to hashtag CPFC on Twitter. It'll be fine. Yes, I think we've learnt, Kieran, both from the Baroness and Ali in the past couple of years, that fronting up is very much the most sensible thing to do. It's actually,
yes, it is.
Rather than just not turning up at home until the next morning, just drop a phone call, say, I'm stuck, I don't know where I am. In Italy, Kieran, it's the Juventus story is turning into Midsummer Murders. Just when you think it's resolved and the credits are about to roll, there's yet another twist.
Yes. Remember, Juventus, who were one of the 3 clubs who were planning to rescue football from a murky future. So as well as having the whole of their board resign, as well as still being one of the champions of Super League until about a month ago, they have now been given a 1-year ban by UEFA in respect of participation in the Europa Conference League. But as always with Juventus, there's more to this than meets the eye. Juventus don't want to be in the Europa Conference League. Whilst, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later in more detail, but whilst if it was Brighton or Palace, we'd be absolutely cock-a-hoop. And you've only got to look at the reaction of West Ham players and staff and fans last year to winning the Europa Conference League. It's a fantastic achievement for any what you might call a mid-tier team.
Kieran, I'm going to stop you there, Kieran, because this terrible sham of you pretending that it's hypothetical, that Brighton in Europe situation. We all know Brighton are in Europe, Kieran. This is probably the only reason producer guys put this question in, isn't it?
No, that was the Europa Conference League. Brighton are one tier higher than that, I think you'll find this year. We're in the Europa League itself.
I think you won't find, because I won't be watching any European football on TV this season, just in case.
So Juventus came out with a very pompous press release saying they had to take into consideration the needs of their sponsors and the desires of their fans who wanted clarity. So therefore, whilst they disagreed with UEFA, they were going to accept the punishment because that would allow people to put the matter to bed and focus. What they didn't want was a potential 2-year ban. And if we go back to 2019, Milan initially were given a 2-year ban by UEFA for financial fair play breach. And Milan said, well, under those circumstances, we're going to appeal. So they started off the appeal process. And then they said to UEFA, look, we can cut your costs and we can cut our costs if we will magnanimously just accept a 1-year ban. And UEFA said, well, it's still seen as a punishment. So therefore, we're quite happy to go along with that. It reduces uncertainty on our behalf. What Milan didn't say, of course, was they were in the Europa League that particular season. And again, it's deemed to be by the elite, who are now so ridiculously sniffy that they created their own competition, if we remember, that you didn't even have to win football matches to qualify for. Because Milan didn't want to be in the Europa League, because the revenues generated by it are substantially less than the Champions League, they said, we'll take a 1-year ban from the Europa League, and that means we can focus on getting top 4 this season and the certainty that we're likely to be in the Champions League. And for these clubs, with their payroll, with the size of their squads, having a 1-year hiatus from European competition. I think we saw this with Chelsea about 6 or 7 years ago. Chelsea went on to win the Premier League in 2016 because they weren't in European competition. And I think there's a lot of misapprehension in respect of just how much Europe takes out of clubs. I know I spoke to somebody quite senior at Burnley when they magnificently achieved participation a few years ago, and they finished 7th, and they said it was the worst thing that ever happened to Burnley because they couldn't cope with Thursday, Sunday in terms of preparation for Premier League. And ultimately, it's the Premier League which they want to focus on.
What I don't understand about this story, Kieran, and UEFA essentially kicking Juventus out of European competition next season, is that we discussed before we went away, before you went away on our break, Juventus volunteering. Basically, Juventus, again, like Chelsea, grassing themselves up. Juventus said, no, it's fine. We withdraw from Europe. We realise we've done a bad thing. So is this UEFA saying that, no, we're sacking you before you resign? Is this just sport politics? What is it?
There is a lot of politics involved, and it has to be noted that in the cases of both Chelsea and Juventus, you've got a new board of directors. So what this allows them to do is to point the finger at the previous regime and say, nothing to do with us, Gov. Yeah. It's all to do with the previous. We are fragrant. We are the good guys in all this, and that is quite standard business practice in many, many industries.
It also allows, Kieran, as we've seen from some outlets in Italy, it allows Juventus to imply that they're being punished by UEFA for being part of the Super League breakaway group, isn't it?
Yes, and that's nonsense. I mean, that's a completely independent issue.
Yeah.
But UEFA, it's a win-win deal for UEFA. They get to be seen to be the good guys in this year. We've reported ourselves, and they avoid having to go and play Thursday night matches against the second best team in Albania. And crowds, attendances in Italy are far more erratic than they are here in the UK. So they would have not had particularly good crowds, especially for the group games. And therefore that would be an additional cost from their point of view. Whereas here, the football culture here is, if you're in Europe, you'll get a damn good crowd, regardless of the opposition.
Home and away,
such is the enthusiasm, especially in London, because of football tourism and the popularity of it.
When we first started this pod, Kieran, the phrase sports washing was not one that we would have used on a regular basis. And now I'm not sure if it ever has been the Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year, but it's certainly a word we're all using. But I always thought the idea of sports washing was that you spent a shed load of money to make yourself look better, more acceptable and more popular. And if anything, the Saudis are doing the shed load of money bit, but the more popular and better bit isn't happening. They seem to be drawing attention to themselves in a very negative way by throwing ludicrous sums of money around. And the latest ludicrous sum of money was thrown in the direction of Kylian Mbappe.
Yes, and I think the Saudi authorities, to give them some credit, I think they do know what they're doing, because they've had the experience of golf and the hostility from the industry and the hostility from the Western media with regards to LIV. And then they've said, well, actually, we quite enjoyed that, and now we're going to do effectively the same thing in relation to football. So initially, the observation was that clubs in the Saudi Pro League were recruiting players towards the end of their careers. And there were analogies with the Major League Soccer in the 70s. You and I, we remember Pele and George Best and Rodney Marsh all going across there, playing against local players. They could slalom around 5 or 6 defenders and still have a tequila in their hip flask whilst they were doing it. And everybody was happy. And then it imploded because there wasn't, I think, the necessary structures behind that. With regards to the potential acquisition of Kylian Mbappe, and I don't think it's going to take place myself. You always have to have approval of 3 parties in a deal, and whilst both the buying club and the selling club are happy, there's no indication from the player himself that, despite the amount of money on offer, he's probably taken the view that I'm a multi-millionaire already, having an extra 200 million in my bank, but I can't spend it.
Yeah.
So so therefore he's quite happy to be a bit awkward with regards to this. But clearly it's a world record sum. It would potentially be for just 1 year. I think the length of the contract issue would be a cause for consideration. And Kylian Mbappe wants to play in Madrid. So if this is going to prevent him from going to Madrid in 2024, then I think it will be a non-starter. And clearly his relationship with PSG is pretty fractured, given that they let him out. They've left him off the pre-season tour, and he's now taking legal advice here. Is that some form of constructive dismissal? And it's all getting very nasty. And yeah, the only winners in this will probably be the sports lawyers.
Talking of record sums, Kieran, I was actually quite distressed to hear of the passing of Trevor Francis, once, of course, the most expensive English footballer and ex-manager of Crystal Palace, who distinguished himself by punching our reserve goalkeeper halfway through a match because he laughed when the opposition scored. But he was what a brilliant footballer for our generation, Kieran. He was a superstar, wasn't he?
Yes. I remember him playing in one particular match at Main Road against Brighton, and some players are just effortless, and it's very rare that I've seen players, and remember the pitches in those days were completely different to what we have today, but their feet didn't appear to be touching the ground. They just skated and hovered. And he was absolutely brilliant. I think they stuffed us 4-0 that day, and we were lucky that it was only 4. But yes, a truly gifted player. I think a player that didn't really get the credit that he deserved either because of the fee, because there was this really sniffy attitude towards him. And it's a sad loss, and it's a young age as well,
very young.
And the same for Chris Bart-Williams. You're hearing of.
Yeah, he's only 48 as well. Yeah,
yes.
I saw a very moving tribute to him from Jeff Thomas, the clubmates at Forest as well. That's it's all taken a rather glum turn. Let's take our last news story. It's a very big news story, Kieran, involving Spurs, although not according to Spurs, who are doing the complete nothing, really nothing to do with us, despite the fact that the man owns the club.
Yes. So this is Joe Lewis, the multi-billionaire who lives in the Bahamas, has one of the world's biggest yachts, and historically has been the owner of Tottenham Hotspur. He has been charged by the US authorities with insider trading, and by that, the accusation is that he has given friends, I think, pilots of his private plane, and chauffeurs and friendly assistants, I think is the appropriate phrase, has given them tips with regards to potential money to be made on the stock market, and they benefited from that. Some of the people involved really should have been a bit more discreet, and put it out and said, therefore, he's come back to him. In October 2022, on the 16th of October, there was a document lodged at Company's House. So whilst I've been away on holiday, I still have been, when the Baroness isn't observing me, I've been nipping onto the iPad and just checking my updates from Company's House. So in October 2022, there was a change of control document which went in respect of Spurs, and there were the names of 2 new people who were in charge, in theory, of Spurs, and both of these people represent a trust which is there for the family of Joe Lewis, and both of these people appear to be based in the Bahamas, which is a pure coincidence because it just happens to be where Joe Lewis is based. So on first glance, it would appear that Spurs are correct, that from a legal point of view, that he is no longer the owner of the club, and that is what it says as far as the documentation is concerned. What the US authorities might do is that they might try to apply something which we sometimes refer to as substance over form, and substance over form works as follows: is that if it looks like a duck, if it swims like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, and if its name is Daffy, just because it's got a birth certificate which says it's a giraffe doesn't mean it's a giraffe. So if there is evidence that Joe Lewis is some form of shadow controller of the trust, then potentially there could be broader issues with regards to Spurs. Now, Spurs is actually a very well-run football club, so I see no problems whatsoever in terms of its day-to-day activities. It's been the most profitable football club in the history of the Premier League. And even if there was potential issues to do with Joe Lewis, people say to me, is Spurs up for sale? The way that it works in football mergers and acquisition is every club is up for sale, although it might not explicitly be so. If somebody comes in with a big offer, then a conversation is going to take place. Now, that offer might have to be very high, but certainly there has been discussions with Spurs and other parties over the past few years. Those discussions haven't necessarily got very far, but it might cause complications if, for what we know, deals or discussions could have been taking place behind closed doors, and everybody's been very discreet and professional about it. That might cause complications, but other than that, I see no negatives as far as the club is concerned.
Can I just point out, Kieran, we get enough snippy tweets as it is without going into the realm of duck giraffe identity politics. So,
Yes.
So that, and also, I just love the idea of you going onto the company's house at 3:00 in the morning, knowing full well that $27 you spent on burger and chips was money well spent, because a couple of cocktails on top of a huge burger and chips, the Baroness is gently snoozing in the background. And like any normal red-blooded man, you think, right, I'll get the laptop out and I'm getting me onto company's house. Yes. Excuse me. Apologies for the coughing, by the way. I have this strange autoimmune disease called sarcoidosis, which occasionally leaves me prone to chest infections, and I've got one at the moment.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's mainly horses and elderly Afro-Caribbean people who get it. So my specialist loves me. Questions, Kieran, and we've got some very interesting questions today. And the first one comes from Somil Dave. And Somil says, I'm a long-time listener and a long-time questioner with the hope that all the questions in the backlog asked will one day be answered. No, we don't. We'd be a pod down each week, Somil, if we answered all the questions. And my question today is about Man City's most recent accounts, which were published in November last year. And note 10B, which details a tax rate difference arising because of a revaluation of the stadium. Could you kindly explain why this revaluation occurred? I thought any notional revaluation gains were deferred tax, but I would appreciate you shedding some light on this. Not half as much as I would, Kieran. I might go and make a cup of tea while you're answering this one.
This is the equivalent of a half volley outside off stump first ball. So thank you very much, Somil. I have looked at this in depth, and I do find it very strange. There is no evidence that Manchester City have revalued their stadium.
Okay.
So therefore, having tax in relation to it had me scratching my head. So I'm not a tax accountant. I used to teach tax accounting, but it was a very painful experience because they change the rules every year. So you had this huge wodge of new legislation to learn. So I stopped doing that many, many years ago. I think you're absolutely right that normally and the way when it works is, let's say that you've got a stadium which you bought for £100 million. You now think it's worth £150 million. Well, there's £50 million worth of profit there, but we've not yet made the profit because you've not yet sold the stadium. If you're going to make £50 million worth of profit, then HMRC are going to say, well, hold on, we want 19%, 25%, whatever it's going to be of that. And therefore, you're supposed to set aside, if you're going to show the increase in the value of the stadium, you ought to show the tax on it. So I do find this one a little bit strange because they appear to have done the tax bit, but not the revaluation bit. But I'm sure there's a logical explanation for it.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, if there are any tax experts out there, maybe they can help Somil on this one.
Yeah.
Via us, of course. I'm not suggesting. We haven't reached the stage where we're putting people in touch with each other privately yet, Kieran, have we?
Only on Patreon.
Oh, really? I don't know what we offer on Patreon. I know it's only £1 a week. Rob Hindmore has a question, and it's a useful question because it gives us a chance for an update about a club that's on our worry list. It's not as high up our worry list as Southend has been in the past, but it's certainly on our worry list, and that's West Brom. And Rob says, on a recent pod, you mentioned that West Brom had loaned their owner a sum of money, and this got me thinking about the interest accrued on loans. Could a club use this interest to fiddle financial fair play as a source of income? And perhaps before you answer that question, Kieran, you could give us a quick update on the latest at West Brom.
Well, the latest is that the owner of West Bromwich Albion, who has borrowed money from the club and promised to pay it back early in 2023. So we are recording this on the 30th of July. Mm-hmm. So I think his definition of early is fairly loose. There's no evidence that the money has been paid back, which isn't good. He is paying a very low rate of interest on this. We have seen in the past few days reference to a potential takeover at a value of £60 million. And people are going, oh, this sounds good. And then you say, oh, the owner, to be fair, the owner does have a portfolio of business interests, is known for making money in the crypto industry.
Uh-oh.
So exactly, in terms of frying pan and fire, and for all I know, this person could have. We're on good terms with Peter McCormick, and he's quite evangelical with regards to Bitcoin, as opposed to some of the other cryptocurrency offerings. So there is a potential deal to be had here, but there is also problems as far as West Brom are concerned. There's no evidence that they paid this money back. I don't think they're making many signings. They have got their wage bill down, but it is quite messy. Now, just tagging back to Rob's question, I think 1 or 2 years ago, this was another opportunity for clubs to massage the numbers, because you could lend money to the owner, let's say, £3 or £4 million, it could be £20 million, and if you then charged him 50% interest a year, you could have that as money which was coming into the club, and presumably that would count towards FFP. What we now have under both certainly the Premier League rules, and I suspect under the EFL rules as well, is that any transactions between what we refer to as related parties and the clubs are subject to scrutiny and are assessed for fair value. It would be highly unlikely that a individual would borrow money from a football club and pay them 50% interest under normal arm's length independent transactions. So therefore, even if the 50% interest was paid, the Premier League will say, well, the market rate is 8%, so we're only going to allow you to use 8% with regards to that particular transaction. So as part of the ongoing whack-a-mole that exists in terms of people coming up with schemes, and I'm not accusing you of trying to create a scheme here, Rob, but all accountants and lawyers who are involved in this have been feverishly trying to come up with ways to circumvent the existing rules. I think this particular one could have been allowed up until the relatively recent tightening of the financial fair play rules.
Rob might be quite happy if you accuse him of coming up with this clever idea. Rob might be straight down the pub telling his mates that Kieran Maguire said I'd come up with a really clever idea of fixing FFP. And his mates will go, we'll phone West Brom up then. The evidence of repaying the loan, Kieran, that you say has not been seen, might that be because it wouldn't appear until the next accounts are out? Would there be somewhere, would the club issue a press release to say that the loan has been repaid, or would they think that it's no one else's business until they have to publish the accounts eventually?
Well, given the amount of attention that's been given to this particular topic, and we know people, Adrian Chiles, Adrian Goldberg, we know Ali as well from Action for Albion. Given the amount of attention that's been directed towards West Bromwich Albion, and I think the former chief executive Ron Gourlay, he says I'm in daily contact with the owner, asking him to repay the money, you would have thought that this would be a huge PR victory if there was any indication that the money had been repaid. So there is no legal obligation to put that into the public domain, but from a marketing and PR perspective, you would expect the club to say, look, the owner is a really good guy. You've been very harsh on him, but he's repaid the money. He's repaid the interest as well. And the interest rate is actually the opposite of what Rob was suggesting. It's actually a ridiculously low rate at a time of, I'd like to get my mortgage at those particular rates that the West Brom owner is paying. But I'm pretty certain that should any money be forthcoming, then there would be something up on the club website almost immediately.
Right. Our next question, Kieran, is a nice positive one for a change, and it comes from Toby Kinder. It's such a nice positive question that I'm not going to make any childish jokes about Toby Kinder's name, especially as it occurs to me it might be pronounced Kinder, which would be a great name, I think. Is your name Toby? Kinder? Sorry, Toby. I beg your pardon. Toby's probably going, I'd rather have a Kinder Egg joke, mate. Just get it over and done with. But this is a great question, Kieran, and you alluded to the fact that this question was coming up. And it's also pertinent because we spoke to the owner, basically, of the Latvian FA recently about this very thing. And Toby says there is a lot of predictable scoffing about the Europa Conference League when it started from Premier League clubs and fans. But is it a rare case of UEFA getting something right? Last season, I visited Riga and saw local side RFS against Istanbul Başakşehir. The game featured ex-Premier League and Serie A players. The locals were there in thousands with their children and were made up with securing a point in a tight 0-0 draw. They also had Hearts and Fiorentina in their group, both of whom I'd imagine brought decent away followings. I'm guessing the conference is really good for the smaller nations and is bringing income to clubs at this level that, although negligible by our standards, has a significant impact on their balance sheets. And Toby's right, we do tend to look at this from a kind of snooty Premier League prism, some people, don't we? So is it a good thing for the smaller clubs?
It's absolutely fantastic. And again, I'd refer back to West Ham. You've only got to see the joy, the abs. I appreciate that this is a football finance show, but you and I are both football fans first and foremost. So it gives fans the opportunity to see their teams play against European opposition. It gives them the opportunity to travel, and from the club's point of view, if we take a look at UEFA's accounts, their most recent set of accounts, which of course I have a copy of, you've got a minimum of €3 million for participation in that competition, and that's purely prize money. Now, on top of that, you'd have 3 home matches as a bare minimum. You would have those away fans coming in as well. You might get sponsors bonuses, and €3 million is a lot of money. For some of the clubs in Scotland, for example, it could potentially double or practically double their total revenue for clubs in the SPFL. That wouldn't be the case for the likes of Rangers and Celtic, and also Aberdeen and probably Hearts, but it does have a huge impact. And for a club in Latvia, for a club in Albania, for a club in Cyprus, it can make a significant impact. And if you make further progress in the conference, and I don't think this money would be sniffed at, Roma in 21-22, they made €19 million from winning the competition. And that, again, is purely from the prize money. On top of that, they would have had 6-7 home matches. Now, I was saying to you earlier that attendances in Italy don't tend to be that great, certainly at the group stages, but as you make progress through the competition, people do pick up more interest. Admittedly, from that, you would have to pay costs, and I think this is where we see the bigger clubs being a bit sniffy, because they do their sums and they realise that once they've played the bonuses for participation in the matches, bonuses for winning the competition, you're probably going to lose money overall. If you are a Juventus, if you are Spurs, for example, in this year's competition, or whoever it's going to be. But it's going to be a loss leader. Although, sometimes football should be about the fans, and I don't know fans of that many clubs that really hate the opportunity to get into a cup competition, to make progress during it, to go to cities such as Rome or Riga. I think it'd be absolutely fantastic, there should be that consideration as well, as opposed to, well, we've got to look at it from a bottom line point of view first and foremost.
Yeah, I'd like to point out to West Ham fans that it was Kieran who called you a small club, not me. So if you're going to send your tweets with various Appy Hammers and crossed hammer logos, send them to Kieran Maguire at POF Pod. It's I still like the fact, I love annoying West Ham fans by the fact that only West Ham have got a mascot who is a giant lethal weapon, basically. Or if you prefer, a giant tool. But Gareth Williams is crafty, Kieran. Gareth Williams says, how do clubs keep track of player wages, amortization, and all the other stuff? Do they just use a complex, I imagine, Excel spreadsheet or bespoke software programs? And Gareth goes on to add, I figured that if I mention spreadsheets, open brackets, and Tracy Crouch, close brackets, I'll have more chance of Kieran wanting my question read. Tracy Crouch's birthday while you were away, Kieran.
It was.
I searched in vain for evidence that she was spending her birthday in Philadelphia, which should have fed my conspiracy theories. But happy birthday, Tracy, if you're listening. It's quite an interesting question, actually, Kieran. 20, 30 years ago, clubs had a secretary who probably had a notebook of some sort, or maybe a fancy Rolodex. Who knows? But how do they keep up with all this stuff now?
Well, first of all, Tracy Crouch is in Kilimanjaro. She's climbing Kilimanjaro at present. She's raising money for breast cancer awareness in East Kent. Tracy has had cancer herself, so she's very passionate cause. And if anybody wants to support her, if you go onto her LinkedIn page, there's a link there. And it's one of those things you can either make a donation, or alternatively, I think there's some sort of auction of a variety of prizes, and that includes, I think, attendance at a test match, signed Spurs shirts, and lots of other goodies, things like a spa weekend and so on. So it's a fantastic cause. So I'll get that bit out of the way to begin with. But back to Gareth's question. Clubs do have pretty sophisticated accounting systems in the main these days, and they will also have reminders as to when individual payments are made. And I think that's probably the most important thing, because we have now moved into the regime of paying transfers by instalments. It's absolutely essential that you pay the money on the correct date. We're recording this on the 30th of July, for example, and this show is going out on the 31st of July. And just a reminder to everybody who is self-employed that you've got to pay your next instalment of tax today on the Monday. So
I was in chest infection notwithstanding, and I was in quite a good mood till you told me that.
Right, sorry.
Because I had a similar phone call twice last week from Bobby Numbers. It's like, yes, I know. Basically, it's not a reminder to pay for me. It's a reminder to phone them up and tell them why I'm not paying. But this is the one on account. So they're less fussy about the payment on account. So apart from that one, I'm almost up to date for the first time in about 28 years.
Right. So I think the club secretary and the finance director between them will have a list of outstanding payments. With regards to wages, you'll use bespoke payroll software. And I think that's the case for the major clubs, and for the smaller clubs, most small businesses, they'll be using something such as Sage or Xero as a means of doing that particular tracking, and they've got dedicated payroll software. So it isn't so much of an issue, because effectively the accounting is all done online. I know when I first met Andy Holt at Accrington Stanley, he said that when he first got involved with the club, it was still done in pencil.
Wow.
So he said, I've never seen, it took him back about 20, 25, 30 years we were having a discussion earlier with regards to first pay packets. And I remember receiving my first pay packets, and this was from American Express, a bank. They used to go and pay me in cash, which was amazing in those days. So some clubs are still run on a perhaps more amateurish basis. Sometimes that's by design, because they might be looking to shuffle money around. And I'll say no more than that. I'm not going to mention any clubs, of course. But there are some strange transactions still taking place in the world of football, for reasons which perhaps involve more of a forensic examination by certain authorities.
I might try that HMRC pencil trick. I'm sorry, it's just faded in the sunlight. I don't know. I'm sure. It might not surprise you to know, Kieran, that my first pay packet was also cash, but there was no pay packet involved. It was just the cash, and there was no accountancy system. But I did get to keep the lead and copper that we told people we had to remove by law. I'm sorry, love. There's a new law. That's all got to come out, and it's got to be plastic pipe. I made more from the lead and copper than I made from the builder I was working with. My dad used to get paid cash through the post. It used to arrive on Thursday morning in a registered envelope.
Wow.
Yeah, and he couldn't get the tube to work until the cash arrived to pay the fare. This next one, Kieran, is a fascinating one, I think. And I'm actually quite intrigued to hear what the answer is. It comes from David Watson. And David said, one thing I found interesting in Rangers accounts last year is that they report merchandise income net, while Celtic report it gross. So that made me think of two questions. Firstly, what is the norm? And secondly, does this give Rangers future wriggle room from a financial fair play perspective? Could they just choose to report gross, thereby increasing revenue? Or would there need to be a change in terms with either Castore or a new manufacturer?
Right, David. There is no norm here. I think the issue as to whether you report merchandise income gross or net, and I think in the case of Celtic, it's well over £20 million that they're showing in terms of their merchandise sales. It probably comes down to who is the risk taker with regards to the sale of the kit. Now, by the risk taker, what happens if you bring out a new kit and for whatever reason it doesn't sell? The fans don't like it, or it's seen as being a bad omen, or whatever it's going to be. What do you do with all of the unsold kit at the end of the year? If the football club has the responsibility of having to flog it off, or to give it to charity, or just to go and stick it in a skip, or whatever they're going to do with it. If the football club is the risk taker, then they would probably have to show the revenue gross. If the risk is effectively being borne by the manufacturer, and I am aware of quite a few clubs who have got mega stores which you think are the megastore of such and such a club. And I know this does apply to the Premier League as well as other divisions. And I don't know the position in precise detail at either Celtic or Rangers. But if the manufacturer is running the megastore, then what will happen is the football club will effectively charge them a rent and just take the commission on the sales and report net, as is in the case of Rangers. What we're trying to do, I've actually been in touch with one of the manufacturers, and we're hoping to get them to come on, because you and I, we're both big fans of football kits, and it could be we could have perhaps an ask the kit producers show where listeners can write in. So I'm just trying to finalise that with one of the major manufacturers, and I think it will be good for you and I, because we can just talk nonsense about football kits, and I suspect the listeners will enjoy it as well. And having seen social media whilst we've been away, I think the listeners appeared to enjoy the shows where we weren't in them very much, more than ours. So the ego took a massive. They'll be missing me wittering on a Thursday morning about the latest. No, they love Chloe and they love James Brown.
Yeah. More Chloe Horrocks, more James Brown. Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah, I've not been in the Palace Club shop since they stopped selling Palace Garden gnomes.
Really?
Yeah, I got up to 5. My ambition was to get a full 11, of course, plus
Of course.
a subs bench. But Ali indicated by the angle of our eyebrows that perhaps that was an ambition I should park for the moment. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Paul McCudden. And Paul says, quick follow-up question on the John Kevin Augustin story. Leeds have been ordered to pay €21 million. Have they paid it? And if they haven't yet, what would actually happen if they just didn't pay it? So Paul asked for a quick follow-up. And as we still have a couple of questions to go, Kieran, if we could make this a quick follow-up, that would be probably helpful cricket-wise.
Yes. Have they paid it? The simple answer is we don't know. Certainly the story broke in around about April. With regards to the consequences, because this is a ruling effectively made by FIFA, FIFA could impose sanctions, and those sanctions are most likely to be connected to Leeds United's ability to sign players. Now, FIFA come in for a lot of stick, but one of the things that they do quite well is that they act as a clearinghouse with respect of all unresolved transfer fees and also unresolved amounts paid to players. And this also affects the Saudi Pro League. The Saudi Pro League does have a rather poor reputation with regards to player payments, by the way. So we don't know what's happened, but potentially if the money is not being paid by the due date, we could see FIFA following up by taking sanctions.
Sorry, Keir, this was meant to be a quick answer. The Saudi Pro League have got a poor reputation for paying transfer fees.
I think player wages. I know there's been quite a few claims. Okay. I don't know the score with regards to transfer fees, but for a league which is so high profile these days, you would think it's an area that they would want to clear up. If Cristiano Ronaldo is going to be paid his weekly wage, because you can just imagine A, his bottom lip, and B, the fairly global backlash against the authorities should those monies not be paid. But I think for some of the smaller clubs who have not historically been owned by PIF or the government as such, that things have been a bit spotty.
I think Cristiano Ronaldo, Kieran, unlike us, is way beyond the stage where he's checking on a Friday morning whether his money's coming, isn't he?
Yes,
I think he's just going to assume it's coming in, isn't it? Our next question is from Tommy. Tommy with an I. So he may be from Finland, for all we know, but I suspect, given the nature of the question, he's from Wigan. Tommy with an I says, last year, Liam Richardson was sacked by Wigan just a few weeks after signing a brand new 3-year contract. Does this mean Wigan effectively have to pay him 3 years' worth of wages, or do clubs often put clauses in their contracts to prevent themselves being liable for their own stupidity?
There will be a contractual clause to say, in the effect of termination of the contract, these are the following steps that will take place. Now, as far as the manager is concerned, that's normally resolved fairly quickly because it's not in the interests of the club for that to drag on. The League Managers Association will represent the player, or the player might actually ask their legal reps to give some guidance here. It's not always the manager also has an obligation to try to find themselves another position. So there will be, it could be you will get 12 months worth of pay, but you've got to be seen to be actively applying for jobs during that period. Again, there are specialists in this area. So I'll have a chat with one of my employment lawyer friends and get them on the show, and they can probably take us through an imaginary contract in sort of from cradle to grave, and give us some sort of more specific advice with regards to that. But they won't necessarily have to pay up all 3 years is the simple answer, but it does depend upon the small print. Most contracts are fairly template driven, and therefore that's for the protection of both the football club and the manager.
That's the third person you've invited onto the show already, Kieran. You really are taking that criticism to heart, that they don't want to listen to us. We've got 3 questions to go, Kieran, and the first one is right up your street. It comes from James King. James King says, I have a question about FFP and Newcastle United. I understand they were financially well managed, in inverted commas, under Ashley, which apparently sets them up nicely for the new era with respect to FFP. My question is, given the 3-year time period for FFP, surely Ashley's careful financial management is only helpful in the short term. If the club don't spend within the next 3 years, those sensible years will fall out of the FFP considerations and can no longer be useful to them in this context. Is there a way Newcastle can defer or amortise that FFP credit to continue to benefit from Ashley's cautious approach beyond 3 years? And there's no doubt, Kieran, that you have said Ashley technically did manage the club financially very well.
Yes, it made money over the period of ownership. He also lent the club money on interest free, which is not always the case with all owners. So, as far as James's specific question is concerned, one mention of Mike Ashley, and that's it. He's sulking. He's out. He's having no more of that. You cannot extend that period. So you've got. It's a case of use it or lose it with regards to the financial benefits. However, what you can do, and I think this is what Newcastle have done, and Newcastle's wages as a proportion of revenue, I think, is the highest or the second highest in the Premier League as far as 2022 is concerned, is that you can certainly accelerate the level of spending. And if on the back of that you qualify for the Champions League, as has happened with Newcastle, you then get access to that extra minimum of £30 million, potentially substantially more, that will be created on the back of that. So you cannot extend beyond 3 years, but if you use that money well within 3 years, and you've got to give credit here to Eddie Howe and to Dan Ashworth and the whole team at Newcastle, they've been really smart with the way that they've spent the money, then you get the benefits from the consequences of those good decisions.
Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Tim Fitzgerald. And Tim says, what would happen if a newspaper or broadcaster decided to leave out the word Sky Bet before Championship or League One or Two? Would Sky Bet be able to do anything about it? And if not, why does the media give away all this free advertising to the gambling industry? If we could answer this question, Kieran, without rehearsing our issues with gambling in football, it would probably be helpful time-wise. But it's interesting, on Saturday, Kieran, my favourite flat race of the season, the King George and Queen Elizabeth, took place. I didn't have a bet, but it was notable that before the first ad break, one of the presenters mentioned the name of the race several times without mentioning the sponsor's name in it. And after the first ad break, she mentioned the name of the race with virtually only the sponsor's name in it for several minutes. So clearly somebody had had a word with her during the commercial break about not omitting the sponsor's name from the race title.
Yes. Sponsors of competitions also pay a lot of money for adverts on television and in newspapers. So it's not in the publisher's interest to avoid giving the name of the sponsor. Now, it is very evident that if you read certain newspapers, they tend to be more relaxed about it than others, and that could be because they've got a direct or indirect link historically with the name of the sponsor. So we still have references to the EFL Championship as opposed to the Sky Bet EFL Championship from quite a few parties. But I think there is probably a contractual obligation that if you are going to pay for the broadcasting rights, then you've got to mention the name of the sponsor a de minimis number of times.
Yeah, I've been in plenty of tunnels at football matches after games, watching the dainty ballet between the BBC pundit and cameraman and the club's press officer, as the club's press officer tries to put the manager or player being interviewed in a way that so many of the sponsors' names can be seen on the board, and the people from the BBC try and block as many as they possibly can. Our last question, Kieran, is one of those light-hearted ones which we like, but which may start a serious conversation for all we know. And it comes from Roberto Petruccio. And Roberto says, I have a random question about Ashton United and their attempt to sign Erling Haaland tweet during the World Cup. Within a couple of hours, the club had gone viral with several big Twitter platforms picking up the story. We can't call it Twitter now, X. With several X platforms picking up the story. It's confusing. Elon Musk is meant to be a genius, isn't he? As a result, their website crashed due to the volume of traffic. I promise this relates to finance, Roberto says. Obviously, they would have been able to afford Haaland, But it got me thinking about advertising and whether this PR tweet would have meant they gained a bit of extra income, as the adverts on the website would have been seen by an extremely high number of people in comparison to normal. Would there be any other ways they would have financially benefited from this tweet?
What could have happened is that if a commercial potential partner saw it, they might say, I like the cut of your jib with regards to your PR strategy. And on the back of that, we're going to sign a front of shirt deal or a back of shirt deal. And therefore, you could benefit from that. Certainly, the benefits of going viral on social media can be monetized. That's all part of being smart in the world of marketing and advertising. My big issue with Elon Musk is that I've got a Malcolm X T-shirt.
Oh,
because I'm a big fan. So should he now be known as Malcolm Twitter? I don't know where we stand with regards to that.
That's a very good point. And people will be watching you walk around in your Malcolm X shirt going, how much money has Elon Musk paid him to advertise?
His name Malcolm.
Yeah, that's very funny. I feel sorry for the 7-year-old Ashton United fans who won't have known that tweet was postmodern and ironic.
Yes.
They were thinking, Erling Haaland's coming to Ashton United. It's good to be back, everybody. Apologies for the cough. I promise you it will be gone by the next pod, as I'm aware of the cycle of my chest infections. Thanks to everyone who's donated. That's not a sentence I expected to read out loud at any stage, Kieran. I'm aware of the cycle of my chest infections. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that would be very kind of you. You could do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on our next questions pod, which will be next Monday, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with all your latest football finance news. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thanks for everybody for your support and keeping us going over the break. I hope you enjoyed the shows. And if anybody does have any, I think the general consensus was that they seem to enjoy the nostalgia show. If you think they are good fun, let us know. And we're quite happily have a go at one or two again. They were good fun researching, and we do like to get nostalgic. Myself and Kevin, as you probably know from the number of references to 1970s sitcoms that managed to creep onto the show. There is a Patreon if you want advert free. I think for £3 a month, and also access to the quiz, which will probably take place twice a year. It's always good fun to interact with people and to see people on a face-to-face basis. But there's another way you can support the show, and that's to go onto your app, and that is to give us a review. We don't know quite how it works, but producer guy keeps telling me algorithms, Kieran, algorithms. That's all you need to know. You can write whatever you want. You could even say you would rather have the show presented by Stuart Broad and Rowley Birkin QC. And I think that would be a fantastic show.
Stuart Broad might be a bit more chipper now he's retired from the game, because I've met Stuart a couple of times, and like most fast bowlers, he's angry. He's fast bowlers and groundsmen are without a doubt the angriest people in sport. So perhaps if we got Stuart Broad and a football groundsman on together, that would be fun. Yes. But I suspect only one of them would come out of the room unbeaten. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.